thank you all for staying around. You all are the real winners. A lot of times people use intermissions to run away, so I really appreciate that it looks like the majority of you did it, which shows how informed and caring of population we have here at Binghamton. So thank you very much for sticking around. Our next question that we're going to talk about is centered on the issue of crime. And so the question is, do you think increased policing can effectively combat crime, or is there another solution that would work better? And we're going to start with the Democrats, who get 2 minutes to speak.
Okay, is this thing working? I am? Okay, well, this is obviously a very complex and nuanced issue. And ideas such as abolishing the police have been proposed, and I think that has caused arguments to not really be in good faith because you have people reacting to the idea of abolishing the police. And that's not what I'm here to say. But what I am here to say is that I do believe that increasing police presence and funding does not help combat crime effectively. A disproportionate amount of media coverage is generally focused on violent crimes, murders, kidnappings, robberies, right? And if you were to believe the amount of coverage that it gets, you would assume that this makes up, like 50, 60, 70% of crime. But the reality is, if you look at police departments and their websites, 1%, sometimes even less than 1% of all calls for crime are about violent crime. And so really, when we're talking about increasing policing, a lot of times it's in reaction to violent crimes. And the belief is that increasing policing and policing funding would help combat those violent crimes. But in reality, these violent crimes aren't really something that the police are addressing most of the time in the first place. And so in reality, what happens when you increase police and policing funding is that you really just hurt a lot of the citizens of the communities that they're supposed to protect. In 2020, we obviously had a huge crime spike and a huge spike of gun violence, and that was a lot due to the fact that the pandemic caused a lot of mental health issues. But really, increasing the number of officers corresponds with increasing the number of police contacts. It causes an increasing amount of arrests, and these fall disproportionately on Black and brown people. These fall disproportionately among people that are financially disadvantaged. And so ultimately, what we're doing, we're increasing policing funding. It's just causing them to further target those that are financially disadvantaged. And so community policing.
Thank you very much. We'll turn to the Libertarians next.
With the switcheroo there. Okay, so so going into this, we obviously understand that the Republicans are going to say something about how we need more policing because of the increase of crime, and the Democrats are going to say that obviously increasing more policing doesn't necessarily mean that crime is going to go down. Now, both have their own valid points. Obviously, like we were talking about earlier with the Republicans and their belief in the rule of law, of course, you see a lot of the crime rate that's getting raised in these areas, such as in urban city centers like cities, that a lot of the time it's because people who are in power there are not allowing people to protect themselves and their property, which seems like a huge issue. Now, the Democrats have a great point. The police aren't being efficient at actually helping us. So the question then becomes, how do we determine what the role of the police is in the 21st century? As the amount of brutality is increasing, and obviously it seems like a certain people are being disproportionately targeted. So let's have a little thought experiment for a second to think about this. If the police were not funded pretty much all in part by the government, and instead were, just say for instance, a private company, would they be able to get away with nearly the same amount of degree of brutality that they were getting away with currently today? And it seems pretty obvious to me that if you had a system in which you could actually reform the police, it seems that it has completely failed because the brutality continues to this day. So obviously there has to be some sort of big, huge overhaul. And it seems to me that the couple ways you could go about it is maybe have more community policing, deal with the fact that the police need competition. We have a very ineffective policing system. And another thing is also, really, we have to break down some of these really terrible and draconian laws that we have in the books right now. Stuff like about drug possession, prostitution, all these things that are actually hurting more than they are helping.
Thank you very much. Everybody with Republicans. All right. I'd like to begin by saying that when I think of policing, I think
it's never just crime is on the rise. Like, historically, I believe that violent crime itself has been an overall decline since the 1990s. But what we're seeing recently in terms of increase in property theft, specific acts of violent crime, especially in New York City, I think what we're witnessing is the aftermath of the COVID pandemic and the economic instability that's been created because of it. Now, fundamentally, I believe that crime and the economy are inseparable issues. And what we're seeing is people who are desperate, they have very few opportunities to get ahead, very few opportunities for employment. It's harder to get a good paying job. And when that happens, I feel as though people are more willing to shoplift, they're more willing to go after stores. So fundamentally, I think the economy is the overarching issue that instead of increased policing, which I don't believe historically works, especially in the context of the drug war. So it is a complex issue, but at the end of the day, once people are in homes that they can afford, with jobs that are decent, education that provides for their needs, once those issues are settled, I think crime almost disappears.
All right, next we'll go back to the Democrats. And I understand that you don't think hiring more police will actually be able to solve the problem, but what do you think we should be doing instead?
So I'll answer that first, and then I'll get to the other two thoughts. I think that, unfortunately, I didn't have enough time to get into this into my intro, but I think, like Logan said, a lot of the factors that go into increased crime are economic. A lot of impoverished people commit crime, whether it's to get by or do whatever else. And so improving those material conditions through several infrastructure programs, through welfare programs, just making sure that everyone has basic necessities, a place to live, the ability to get a job, right? Those are factors that obviously you can never get crime down to 0%, but you can drastically reduce it and make society overall a much better and a safer place. Getting to the points made by the other clubs, I actually largely agree with what was said by the other clubs. One thing I will say is, if the libertarians mentioned private companies, I don't believe policing necessarily should be in the hands of private companies because, unlike the government, even though we are dissatisfied with what the government has been doing, a private company doesn't answer to the public at all. And so putting policing in their hands means that they can basically do whatever they want, and we can't really do anything about it. So that actually would be worse than a governmental solution. But largely, I think otherwise, I agree with both clubs, and I think addressing those economic factors and reducing the amount of policing so that you're de-escalating instances of police brutality, for example, would be best. And so, yeah, around there.
All right, thank you. Next, we'll turn to the libertarians, and I am curious because you did say that you thought it'd be good to have competition with the police. How you think like a privatized police system works, or how competition between different police groups would work?
Right. So, okay. So, to first point out just a little thing is that, in the absence of a monopoly on force, such as, like, for instance, police, if you had maybe an opt-in system of police, as in, let's say, I voluntarily decide to pay my taxes to a police service that the government provides, that would already be a really good way of determining whether or not the police system is working, because otherwise you always have the alternative of saying, hey, I don't actually like how the government's doing it, I'm just going to go to this private security company instead that's going to do the same thing for me. Now, to your point where you mentioned that the private companies have no reason to actually care about the public will or the will of the people, that's actually the complete opposite. The government is only bound to the will of the people insofar that it works to help them get votes. So yes, maybe every now and again, every 4 years, you might have 51% of people saying we should do it this way instead of the other 49% of people who say we should do it this way, but it doesn't solve the actual issue that without competition for the security that already exists, there's really not a way to create a huge reform in the system. There's no competition, there's no way to recognize that certain things are being misallocated, that certain resources are being misallocated, that there needs to be a change. So I would say that in all instances of any sort of free market version of the economy, what you're going to find is a tendency for companies to operate in the best interest of the public relations with the people. If they weren't providing a service that the people wanted, then they would quickly lose business to a competitor. We see this all the time. We see this currently. The only examples in which we don't see this are in corporations which are already backed by the government in the first place. So if you want to go back to the root of all the problems in terms of what the economy is and how the market has been perverted, I think we can look no further than government incentive structures, the power that is yielded in unions and corporations, and of course, obviously, the monopoly and force that we see in the police.
Time. All right, next we'll turn to the Republicans. And my question to you is that given how you've seen that improving the economy is the best way to alleviate things like crime, how can we actually inspire people to invest in the community if we haven't tackled crime first?
I certainly think that is a great question when it comes to community inspiration. And I think one of the first hurdles to tackle is the fact that when all these conversations about crime that we're discussing, I feel like we need to address the reality that in some instances, those who we entrust with law enforcement can themselves become criminals. Now, what we've noticed at the Broome County Jail is, I believe within the past year, is an instance of a corrections officer smuggling drugs in the Broome County Jail. And across the United States, we're seeing instances of prisoners being beaten or assaulted in some manner. Some are not being medicated, some are not being fed or given water, and we're seeing really drastic conditions in privately run jails. And with that in mind, I think that we do need more accountability in our police system, and I think once we address that, there's more potential for people to really believe that those who wear the uniform, they wear the badge, are out for our best interests. And on the other end of that, I also work as a government aide in the village of Endicott. And through my time in that job, I've learned that there's actually a shortage of police in the village of Endicott, which is about like 15-20 minutes away from this campus. And because of that, I also think it's important to make sure that people are being hired into these roles, that they're not being left empty, because otherwise that stretches resources way too thin and puts more people at risk.
All right, thank you. We'll go to the Democrats for their 1-minute closing remark.
Okay, so I think everyone knows where I generally stand, decrease the amount of violent aggression that happens and put money and resources into non-violent addressing factors, especially economically. I actually just want to touch on a little bit of point of libertarians with the whole company thing again. You say that obviously like companies will actually have more incentive to answer to people than the government does, but we know right now that all the big companies, they do abhorrent things that I think the vast majority of the population disagrees with, but we keep buying from them anyways, right? We keep, like Amazon, everyone knows that Amazon is a pretty corrupt, morally objectionable company, we still buy from them, right? And you actually even mentioned that right now corporations do things that we object to and they still do anyways, and so without government oversight, those companies are even more liable to do whatever they see fit without the market actually addressing what they have. So yeah, but everyone knows where I stand, so I'm gonna wrap it up there.
Thank you. We'll go to the Libertarians next.
Yeah, so government oversight on the economy is the exact reason we got into this mess to begin with. One of the biggest misnomers that I've heard is privately run jails. Obviously, this coincides back in with the very fundamental problem. At the core of all of this is the fact that government is actually involving itself in the economy in certain ways. The government is the one who is taking money from people and deciding to put it in places. If a government program fails, the way that they recognize it fails is they put more money into it. Because obviously, the more money you throw into it, the more likely it's going to work. Not so. And obviously, in the case of a private industry, this wouldn't be the case. Now, let's look at the example like we were talking about with Amazon, corporations in general. Again, where do they get the power to do this sort of thing? They get the power because they have some sort of liability, limited liability, they have patents, they have all these other things that are in place that the government provides them with in order to control and enforce a certain standard And basically, I still stand by my word.
All right, thank you. And let's get the final word from the Republicans.
All right. I guess to give a bit of concluding thoughts on the subject of policing, I think I break on this topic with a lot of other conservatives who go out of their way to show how much they support the police. And personally, I believe that law enforcement is extremely important. And I believe that a lot of these resources are necessary for the public good. And at the same time, I recognize that I feel as though every instance of, the majority of instances of crime happening in Broome County and across the U.S. is fundamentally a very tragic story of how society could have done more, but simply wasn't capable. And on that end, I believe that, in a way, I think those who practice law enforcement need to be held almost to a higher standard, kept to, more accountability than those that they protect. And it's a very complicated issue, but it's multifaceted.
All right, so this next question is a little bit lighter, so each group's only going to get 1 minute to answer this question, and there's not subsequent rebuttals. This question concerns who we would want as our dream presidential candidate. So recent polling has shown that most Americans have significant concerns about each party's frontrunners, Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Outside of Baxter the Bearcat, who would be your dream presidential candidate? We will start with the Libertarians.
Am I able to go last? I have a question first.
Yes. Yeah.
Are both of our moderators saying or just one saying? I say
Each debater gets it. Well, each person can give their dream candidate. So why don't you just go down the line?
yeah, list their names. We don't
Yeah. Just go name, candidate, go. All right. I guess we'll start with the Democrats and we'll go this way.
running away.
If you've ever been to any of our college Democrats meeting, I'm sure you already know my answer. But without a doubt, my answer is to keep He's the notable, the gorgeous, the beautiful alumni of Binghamton University. Not only has he sponsored bills and laws such as prison to proprietorship, or loan literacy for students, or even his human trafficking prevention. He has introduced 124 bills, and a majority of those have been passed. He's was working closely with Kevin McCarthy, a staunch Republican. Not only can Keith Jeffries get it done, I'd like to say that I went to the same university as the president. I think that'd be pretty cool. I think that'd be pretty cool to say. And he's also the only representative in Congress that's from Binghamton University, and I'd like him to be the only president ever to come here. You know what I mean? The only alumni from Binghamton University to be president. I think Keith Jeffries is our leader, and we know for a fact that 212 Democrats, ranging from Colin Peterson to AOC, support him as their leader, and therefore he is indicted.
What's that?
You can just go.
No.
Okay. So I'm going to have two candidates, and they come with a caveat. I think they're both too old and too young, respectively, but like in a vacuum, I personally am a fan of both Bernie Sanders and Alexander Ocasio because I think President Biden has done some good things for this nation, but I think ultimately there are things that can be improved upon. You see the fight with the minimum wage, you see the fight for the issue of addressing policing, and those largely fell through due, not all because of Biden, but some of the owners' lies are there. I think they're both progressive candidates that would be able to continue core values that I think are important to the presidency.
The nature of politics is one that attracts the most bloodthirsty, disgusting human beings in our society. It is the one that attracts those that do not want to create value for others, those that are not seeking to provide for others, but it attracts the type of person that is looking to take from others that people work for and redistribute to their special interests. Career politicians are the most sick human beings you could possibly find. You find there's no other industry that will corrupt more genuine people than I've ever seen. You have innocent, genuine people like Cory Booker that started a career in politics looking to make change. They joined the Democratic Party, ran on school choice programs that helped them get a good education, and suddenly was lined with millions of dollars from teacher unions that convinced them overnight, oh, school choice is an evil policy, that it leaves the education to the free markets and will brainwash you. Suddenly that happened overnight, when that was the reason he got a good education. That is what politics does. I ask you, if you want to make a change, instead of voting, take that hour and go make a difference. Do something for those people. Make a difference. Ask someone how they are.
Chris Christie.
Lysander Spooner, Benjamin Tucker, Murray Rothbard, Ayn Rand, Ron Paul, Javier Milei.
He's not American.
I don't care. He should be American. He's more American than you are. There's probably some more. Sam Congdon, Proudhon maybe, had a nice day. Just look up any of those names, they should be presidents.
All right, I'll try to be a little less melodramatic. But to answer this question, the first ever presidential candidate that I strongly supported was Rand Paul when he ran in 2016. And the reason why is because I feel like he best reflects my personal values. He's extremely consistent on the Constitution, on cutting taxes, on national defense. And at the same time, he's also a strong opponent of the drug war. He believes in police reform. He believes in making sure that the United States is not overexerting its authority when it comes to national security, that we're not spying on our citizens, that we're not waging war without congressional approval. He's consistent on tackling the national debt. And for these reasons, I believe, and I still believe, that Rand Paul would be an excellent president, and I hope he considers running in the future.
Thank you for that. So our final question of the evening is going to be a question from the audience. A good 20 to 25% of you all asked on the same topic that our debaters said they did not want to debate starting when we were doing the planning. But because they thought you were such a wonderful audience, they said we'll roll the dice and let us ask this question anyhow. Keep in mind these are individual students who are answering these questions, and while they are representing their groups, the groups have very diverse viewpoints on the issue, and so they might not be the perfect representative of the Republicans, Libertarians, or Democrats, but it is a student speaking about the issues to keep in mind. So with that, the question that got asked the most concerned Israel and Palestine. And so the question that we will be asking is, can the two-state solution still be possible with Israel and Palestine, or will we need to look for other solutions after the end of the conflict? And so we'll start with the Republicans for 2 minutes.
All right, I get handed the hot potato first. And in that case, I would say that a two-state solution is possible. If I recall correctly, I believe that the majority of civilians currently residing in Gaza are supportive of a two-state solution. I'm not sure about the West Bank. In Israel, it's a very controversial subject, of course. But simply put, a two-state solution is not possible at this moment in time when Hamas is currently the governing authority in Gaza. It's a terrorist organization, flat out. I'm very proud of the work that my great uncle James Finley did in the George W. Bush administration in tackling global terrorism, and I believe that should remain a consistent aspect of the Republican Party. And because of that, a two-state solution must be worked upon, but we all must also essentially, bring democracy to Palestine, make sure that this region is not controlled by terrorists who run free and do whatever they want to civilians. It's not conscionable, and that's my general stance on that subject.
Great, thank you. The Democrats are up next.
Okay, so obviously this is a very complex issue, and To be honest, I don't really know if a two-state solution is possible. I'm not going to say it's not. I really don't know because obviously there's so much nuance that goes into it. So I am going to try to not say too much about it. What I am going to say though is to even consider thinking about a two-state solution, what we need right now is peace, right? Obviously right now there's a lot of violence going on and there's a lot of different groups at play, fighting, and there's a lot of civilians being killed. I think I saw a statistic that said within the past month, I think it was 10,000 Palestinian civilians have been killed. And I don't have a statistic on the amount of Israel citizens that have been killed, but I'm sure that's a lot too. And I think right now, peace is ultimately the best option. A ceasefire needs to be called. The U.S. government needs to support that. The Israelis and the Palestinian groups need to support that as well. And I think once you have peace, you can get to this discussing how the sovereignty is going to work. But right now, a ceasefire is what we need to focus on at the most paramount.
And then we'll turn to the Libertarians.
So I actually completely agree with my Democratic friend over here. I think that a ceasefire is by far one of the most important things that we can have right now. I mean, obviously it all started with Hamas attacking and then the Israeli government responding by shutting down Gaza's access to water and electricity, and then more attacks happening between these two terrorist organizations. And the answer really is get them to stop fighting each other and then deal with the fact that both are currently attacking civilians who have done nothing wrong. So I think that personally the people who are in charge of these governments, including Hamas and people like Netanyahu, should be held responsible and accountable for all the people that they've killed. And I would like to see that happen. But the United States and its sheer sort of timidness and stupidity has been completely afraid of actually trying to resolve anything in the UN, for instance. In the UN, they basically, something like 180 countries or something like that, basically said that they wanted the ceasefire to happen, and the US was one of the few, along with Israel, who didn't want a ceasefire to happen. So it seems pretty obvious that we need to actually get to the ceasefire pretty quickly because more innocent lives are in danger by every minute and every day.
All right, we'll go to the Republicans for the rebuttal. I'm interested in hearing you talk about needing to bring democracy to Palestine. How do you think the track record for the United States democracy promotion has been in the past?
Well, unfortunately, partially due to the Joe Biden administration, I feel as though our record of preserving democracy in the Middle East could be some work. Now, as it stands, I believe that Iraq is still a functional parliamentary democracy, if highly corrupt. Whereas we've insufficiently supported the democratic regime in Afghanistan, and who knows what may happen with Iran in the next few years. Simply put, I think the responsibility is on the United States to ensure that we, if not militarily, or at least diplomatically and economically supporting agents in other countries who are promoting democracy. There are plenty of Palestinians at the moment who would absolutely love the chance to be able to vote for their leaders. I don't believe that Gaza has had a competitive election in 20 years at this point, give or take. I could be wrong about that. And with that in mind, unfortunately, the civilians caught in this situation have no ability to decide what their leaders do, or if we send aid and humanitarian support for food and medicine, Hamas gets to decide what happens to that. The United Nations, I feel like, loses control, and that's why it's such a dangerous thing to negotiate with these radical organizations. I feel like if we get rid of Hamas and implement a democratic regime, they can more efficiently decide where this humanitarian aid goes to make sure that people aren't dying of preventable diseases or starving to death or whatever else may happen. It's imperative that we support this.
All right, we'll turn to the Democrats next for the rebuttal. You talked a lot about needing to promote peace. I was curious on if you think there is justification for a just war theory in any world.
there is no way to really get rid of Hamas in its entirety without just bombing the shit out of Palestine, right? We talked about eliminating Al-Qaeda in the past, right? We talked about the Bush administration response to 9/11, which then ended up in a 20-year occupation of Afghanistan, an occupation of Iraq, an occupation of Syria that caused thousands, millions of refugees to be separated from their homes, to be killed, to be bombed on endlessly. And ultimately, when we consider how we're going to negotiate with Hamas, it doesn't matter because if we continue fighting with whatever factors are at play, more innocent people are going to die. And so ultimately, regardless of whether or not you think that we can get rid of Hamas without targeting civilians, that's just simply not been the case. I already mentioned that 10,000 civilians in Palestine have died within the last month. And obviously, Hamas is not an organization to have some kind of moral standing, right? They've done plenty of terrible things, but to claim that we need to eradicate them before we advocate for peace is a solution that would just result in thousands and thousands of more civilians being killed for no reason. Universities bombed, hospitals bombed, everyone dead and killed, and so ultimately, there is no justification for war. You need peace now, and you can talk about whatever sovereignty issues you have afterwards. But most importantly, peace is important.
Thanks. Next, we'll turn to the Libertarians, and I'm interested in hearing you talk about the success of the war on terrorism as well as the democracy promotion efforts that the Republicans talk about.
There has been no success in the war on terrorism, and there has been no success in spreading democracy. And this is pretty obvious because 20 years on, and still nothing really that substantial. The United States and their foreign interventionist efforts have been entirely inimical to the idea of liberal democracy. When we're talking about the spread of democracy, we're talking about something where the mass of people have to actually already want it. Why would you ever enforce a democracy on people who actually just don't want a democracy? The fact of the matter is that by being involved, we've actually militarized these people against us. We've militarized the most radical elements against us. And for example, we can look at something like how Benjamin Netanyahu actually supported Hamas coming to power because he said that it would actually benefit him if he could make the Palestinians and their governments look crazy. Who's going to support the independence efforts of Palestine that is run by some radical Islamists, right? And so because of that, it becomes incredibly apparent that these people don't have our best interest in mind. And it becomes apparent that they're working a game where they can increase the profitability of the great military-industrial complex, the great machine that has enabled them to give money to their cronies and consistently fund over $1 trillion worth of military aid every single year. And this just has to stop.
Thank you very much. 1 minute closing to the Republicans.
All right. I want to quickly address something that my libertarian comrades referred to when it comes to not being able or not willing to give democracy or support democracy for people who don't want it. Polling for the past few decades has consistently shown that Palestinians do support democracy. They do believe in elections and fair representation, and all of these values are being denied by Hamas. It's effectively a terrorist organization holding an entire country's worth of people hostage, and I do find it a little demeaning to imply that Muslims in the Middle East are not supportive of democracy. I feel like that's simply not true, that many of them are actively fighting against corrupt governments and dictatorships that would suppress their rights. And the United States is the freest country in the world. We are the bastion of liberal values, and we must support that even in places that historically don't have these values.
Thank you. Democrats, get your closing remark. 1 minute.
So again, reiterate, I'm for peace, for a ceasefire. I think that needs to be the first and foremost thing we focus on in any discussion about sovereignty that can happen afterwards. To talk about what's happening right now with the conflict Obviously, Palestinian citizens want peace, and so that's something I'm going to agree with the college Republicans on. And a lot of interested parties want peace, and I agree with that. But I think ultimately, right now, Hamas is obstructing peace, and I agree with that. And I also think we have to acknowledge that there are also other groups at play. There are certain members of the Israeli government that also don't want peace, and so ultimately.